my favorite shows about 8 to 10 years ago was a show called Soul Doctor that was based on the singing rabbi Shlomo Carlebach. And now the show is being made into a film, and I'm so excited to be with the director. Daniel, tell us about how you became involved with Soul Doctor.
I was on my way to rehearsals of the China production of Rent, and this fellow, Dr. Jeremy Chess, stopped me on the corner of 70th and Broadway and in front of a Starbucks, and he said, "I saw you at the Karl Bach Synagogue, on 79th Street on the Sabbath. Do you have 3 minutes to sit with me?" And I didn't, but I said, "What would Shlomo say?" So I sat with him, and he said, "I want to do a musical about Shlomo Carlebach, a Broadway musical." I said, "Well, first something has to be written." He said, "A script, that's why I'm coming to you." I said, "No, a check." I said, "If you want it to be a real project, it's going to take a check." So he took out his checkbook, and we started exploring what kind of a story it is, and we really discovered a great American story.
So you were involved in the Broadway and off-Broadway productions.
Oh, I'm the writer, together with David Schechter as the lyricist, and I was the director of the New York Theater Workshop and the Broadway production, and then this production that was filmed in Jerusalem. So I was the director of about 5 out of the 20 productions that they had out there.
Wow. Tell us your
Privileged to do the Broadway production. Yeah.
Daniel, tell us your background. What is your background?
Well, I was recently born, and I'm first learning to read and write, and I'm meeting new people like you every day. And I did, have a connection to Shlomo Carlebach, as most people of my generation. Most Gen Xers met him, encountered him as a child. Many times he did be-ins in the house until I was about 6 or 7. And then at the end of his life, I did meet him and had some encounters with him, including a few days before he died. We spent about an hour together. So I do have a background both in the communities that he grew up in, the Jewish and Hasidic community, as a Talmudic student and a scholar, that scholarly background. And my theatrical background in theater really helped me, I think, examine the theatricality of his life, the drama of his life.
What is your theatrical background? Let's let our audience know this.
I began writing little plays and short stories and movies before I was a teenager in the house with the family. And by my late teens, we were doing these epic plays, writing and directing up in the Catskills and the Laurentian Mountains, and haven't stopped. Came back to New York from Israel, where I was living for a few years, my 20s, and started working on Miracles with Joe Stein and Marvin Hamlisch, and the wonderful team of composers. And I really was also very involved in pioneering international productions of Broadway, bringing like the first real Broadway casts, veterans of Broadway casts, to China and Russia and many other countries that never had a real Broadway representation there. And I was part of that early pioneering cultural exchange, which has really blossomed into something more serious, especially in China, in the case of China.
I have another friend, David Kaplan, that does that a lot, but he does it with Tennessee Williams.
Oh, wow.
So he's a Tennessee Williams expert. But of all the things that you have directed and worked on, besides Soul Doctor, what is your favorite thing?
Rent. I mean, I have to say, I was privileged to. I brought Rent to China. It was the first real Broadway production to go there. When I say there were other and friends and colleagues of mine who we were in touch at the very same time, but this was brought by the government, and it was a real Broadway. It was the authentic Broadway production with the original cast members and choreography,
Wow.
etc., staging, and you know, they had originally come. We had the daughter of the cultural minister, wonderful ambassador, cultural ambassador, who is really kind of going through an audition process on Broadway of what would be the first production to bring. They wanted to bring the full Broadway production, and people were really pitching them many of the famous commercial projects, which ended up going there. And you know, I respect so much. You know, Sound of Music and Phantom of the Opera and Aida are you know, other Cats. These are classics, and we must share them, etc. But I said, if you want not a show that is for tourists, you know, and
Right.
called tourist shows, but a show by and from the people of America, that if your young people really want to hear a story, a stage story that is from our time and about our time, then come see Rent. And they went crazy for it. Really getting all the jokes. It was a difficult tour, but it was we felt like we were part of history. And Rent will always be, to me, the masterpiece of American, you know, 20th century musical theater.
Definitely
And
changed the landscape.
absolutely, absolutely. I will just a couple of notes of Rent will put me back into a certain place, and I will be uncommunicable for a couple of hours.
Ah, you sound like me. I'm like that with music. Play me something and I'm like in a whole nother world. Um, is Soul Doctor completely filmed? Is it ready to come out, or have you just started filming it?
Oh, Soul Doctor right now is being released on June 13th in theaters nationwide. It's
Wow.
it's going to be a big June 13th. It actually was filmed live archivally, and we did a lot of work to make it really clear storytelling, and worked with the sound and light. So it's a cinematic experience, but it was filmed live at the Jerusalem Festival, the Israel Festival in Jerusalem. And now it's the 10th anniversary of our opening on Broadway. So
Now, I have a bunch of questions on this. We're in National Jewish Heritage Month. Did you know that?
wow. No,
Yeah,
but
Parade just performed at the White House because of that.
really,
Yeah.
wow.
As a matter of fact, we just put it up. You also got the WGA strike. This is a fortuitous time for Soul Doctor to come out.
Yeah, also because, you know, the story itself, I'm glad you mentioned that. The story really focuses on the relationship between Nina Simone and
Yes.
Shlomo Carlebach, and the influence that Black culture and Black heritage, African uh, Amunism, you know, African spiritual practice and heritage had such a profound influence on the Jewish revival, the Jewish Renaissance today. It's like a real life Sister Act story. So, you
Well, you
know,
actually beat me to the next portion of what I wanted to ask about, because there's been several musicals and things written about Nina Simone now, and now this is out.
yeah, well, you know, we're so fortunate that Nina Simone's daughter, Lisa, who's a Broadway diva, big star in her own right, she was the original cast of Rent. And Aida, she was a star of Aida for many years, and others. She was the executive producer of What Happened, Miss Simone, which was a documentary on Netflix about her mother. And now she's come on as the executive producer of Soul Doctor. And
Oh,
so
wow.
she's executive producer of the movie and the theatrical production. So
Is there, in the film, did you add more of that relationship in the film? Because it's very lightly touched upon in the show.
well, you know, it's interesting that you say that. When you saw the show back when,
Yes.
um, it was a more of an epic show. I think it was probably a trilogy. If I can roast myself on
Roast
online,
yourself.
it's my neighborhood, right? It's Broadway.
Right.
So I say it was it was a lot. It was, we were trying to find the story and the focus, and we had great cast and great everyone who pulled it off and told that story so powerfully. But I think it was the audiences who organically clarified what the story is, and through the film, when we really distilled the focus to that turning point in his life and that cross connection
Right.
of how, I mean, the first riddle I had in looking dramaturgically at the man's life who was a scholar living in an ivory tower uh, until he was 30 years old, never wrote a song, spoke rapid talking, fast talking, arrogant sounding. He was a sweet man, but he was a Talmudic student, fast talking, understood everything and knew everything, and then suddenly had this passionate drive to, reinvigorate the Jewish, what he felt was Jewish bankrupt culture in the synagogue. And a year later, he's on the streets with a guitar, talking and singing like a gospel preacher. And so, how did that happen? And he and many others were talking of how he met Nina Simone in a bar, and she was also not a singer, came from the same background, and she taught him and influenced him to write music and brought him to the churches, introduced him to Father Divine. And he really tuned into that with great respect and drew upon their common classical background, a common religious background, both children of clergymen who didn't want their kids to be seen in a bar or playing music. They had such a similar, almost a mirrored paradigm between her classical music background and his Talmudic background, her parents being very strong, from generations of ministers, and very, very conservative in that way. And they both were people who wanted to wake up the world and became the voices of their people and of their heritage revolution. And so that really became the story. And we focused more on that, and we learned more about it and doing more research. But it was also while we were doing the screening that the audiences, particularly African American audiences, when we exhibited the movie for Martin Luther King Day in Harlem for the Kwanzaa Film Festival. Then we were invited to Selma, Alabama for the big Jubilee March, the Bloody Sunday March, 3 years in a row. And the African American audiences really gave us that feedback, and even African American leadership, Black leadership, like SCLC magazine, and they really recognized and encouraged the fact that this story is not about how the Black people were helped by the Jews or by others, during their moment of despair, but rather this is a story of how the Black culture, Black heritage was really at the heart of the Jewish revival during our darkest moments. So there's that duality and that the greatness of cross influence, and how we can heal each other and how we can really reinvigorate each other through that cross influence, and that's became really the story that the audience discovered, and that's how we really cut the film. And I'm, now when people see the story, it's really about that cross relationship and the two communities. It's about the history. We go into the history of Nina Simone much more,
I have
and
a
the rest of
question.
her.
Can I go controversial?
What?
Can I go controversial?
Sure.
Because
Only.
well, that would be me. Right now, our society is trying to pit the Blacks against the Jews, the Blacks against the Chinese, the Blacks against Asian. It's so amazing that you're doing a production that's saying, yeah, not. Because I think this is such a manipulated thing that I can't understand who would want this. You know, there isn't that kind of divide that they're making it to be. So I love the fact that you've gone to the Black film festivals, the Black marches with this. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, it was interesting. My father just passed away a year ago. We've not been in that in touch since I was a child because of circumstance. Circumstance. My mother never let go of her whatever, so not that in touch. But when we went to Selma, he really reached out to me and told me how meaningful it was. He read an article where I said it was a heritage trip for me. My parents, I grew up on the south side of Chicago. My father was doing his postdoctorate there, but even when he was in Yale, before then in New Haven, I have many pictures which I can send you of before I was born, my siblings, two sisters and brother, and my parents marching with King in New Haven and Chicago. My father was arrested, on the lawn for protesting equal housing, lack of equal housing. And my mother worked for CORE for Andrew Young in Chicago. My brother went to an all-black school. He was the only non-black kid in the school,
And
and
let me guess, he was okay, right?
I would have to know this neighborhood. We were near the Kwanzaa huts. I don't know. I did know I left Chicago early, but my mother had after our school volunteering for CORE, and that's
Oh,
how we grew up. I grew up with all the songs, and then I lived in Far Rockaway and Crown Heights. So I thought, everyone was either Jewish, or I thought Jews are kind of like black albinos and all the goyim. Goyim had this red hair with these little cheek, red rosy cheeks,
uh-huh.
and they lived on a different part of town. So for us, this what Heschel calls the eye disease, not the skin disease of racism,
Absolutely.
was absolutely not there. Absolutely not there. We didn't even regard people in the same way as I mean, it wasn't us and them. It was in terms of like the old European idea of when you see Hitler, them, the Goyim,
Right.
Gentiles, those with the Cossacks, they were just our neighbors. We were kind of in the same boat, kind of felt that way.
I
Um,
love it. See, these stories need to be told because what they're trying to make us believe is such bullshit.
Well, I don't know. I'll tell you something interesting. I lived in, New York, and that's a sad thing. I think I have started to recognize it the hard way. New York is a very segregated city, and it's
Highly.
segregated in a very insidious way. And what I mean is that I grew up in a neighborhood where all my neighbors were black or Jewish, and I never knew their names. I never knew their names. I knew every person living within 2 square miles by looking, in the Jewish neighborhood. We didn't. There was that kind of and this was not racism from the Jewish or the black attitude. It was just a New York attitude. And then when I was slightly involved with a family building, I learned that there's very strict real estate codes in certain neighborhoods that are openly spoken amongst all building owners that they do not rent to black people. And it's even black real estate owners will tell me that
Really?
black real estate brokers. So there is, there are all white charter schools in New York. There is a problem, and it's not the problem. I think it's a problem we have to address, and it's not based on anything. It's a baseless problem, and it's something that's being fueled by irresponsible, rebel
And yet
rousers making
it's supposed to
careers
be the
from it.
liberal city.
Yeah, I mean, and it's there because there's not enough communication, not the communication there used to be. If there's more one-on-one, intercommunication in our city, I could just say in New York, even Broadway. I was working on Broadway. Oh, suddenly people are hiring black people on Broadway. It was a real disgrace for many years that Broadway was truly a white business, and very, very, so many uh, talented African American, like there's in many, many areas, I just would hire people in areas that no one ever thought that there were black sound mixers or sound designers I'm not going to mention particular people, but yeah, and in certain uh, on stage as well, in terms of casting, there was absolutely no equal casting. It's first becoming something that there's a real effort, and it's great that it's happening. So
It's
I
great that
think
it's
that there is
happening,
a
but
problem, and we need to address it. Yeah,
I think it should be based on talent, not color. I think
absolutely.
talent, but that's not what's happening right now.
No,
And
no, now it's happening
that's
the other.
what's
I
sad.
say hire black people, but seek excellence. Seek
Exactly.
excellence.
But it
Interview
should be
everyone. Seek excellence.
excellence no matter what color you are.
But
It's
you
annoying.
find excellence. I've
Oh,
really, really,
absolutely.
really,
Absolutely.
really people who will blow your mind how smart and on point they are, more than most. And the fact is, they have not been given a chance. They're all cast in, I know a black theater up in, in Detroit. They'll hire you, that would be a great place for you to go. And it's unfortunate that that was the reality. So there is a divide. I'm not saying it's something that is made up by media. It's exasperated by media, and it's caused not by anything other than lack of communication, lack of being involved with each other. And this is a story about how for creative collaboration, they were making music, they were discussing music, and that's what happens in theater. We've had, doesn't matter what the backgrounds are of anyone in a room. When you're creating theater, right? You have to value everyone 100%. Nobody's important. Joe Stein would always say to me when they made Fiddler on the Roof, it doesn't, any idea that was good, that worked, was accepted. It didn't matter if it was from an assistant. And any idea that didn't work, it didn't matter if Jerome Robbins suggested it. It was thrown out. Everybody is very valued, and
Collaboration.
when you have what? Collaboration. And you
Collaboration.
want their heritage. What? You want their heritage. You want
Yeah.
everything about them. You want their everything, to be put into the project. And that's what this story is. And that's what we are as a city. Yeah, and that's what the theater community is starting to become,
What
you
would you
know.
like Soul Doctor to accomplish?
To be a platform for this conversation, for the conversation of how we can make art together, but how much stronger that art is, there's something in someone else. When you meet someone else, there's something in them that could really lift you up, to know that by smiling at someone and learning from someone, there's something that you can learn from, not in a condescending way, but that can actually change your life, from a homeless person, someone you think is your enemy, someone you're afraid of. If we're eager to learn from each other and to be resourceful from each other, make art together, then I think that that's a conversation, a never-ending conversation.
Absolutely.
That's the story of 1,001 Nights, and that's what I hope. I hope it'll start a lot of stories and start a lot of songs.
I hope so too. When does Doctor open?
It opens on June 13th in theaters everywhere, all 50 states.
Is it having like a premiere?
Yes, we're having a premiere right now. We have in about 600 theaters, there'll be a premiere. Everyone is the star because it's a sing-along, and Lisa
Cool.
Simone. Yes, Lisa Simone does a beautiful introduction to the movie, and we have some other surprises. India Arie created this piece for at the beginning of the movie as a welcoming
Nice.
piece of that's relevant to Juneteenth.
But at
And
the same, it's on Juneteenth. How fabulous!
the week of Juneteenth. It's the week
I
leading
didn't
to
think
Juneteenth.
about that, but yeah.
We didn't either. It just happened to be that way. You see.
Well, see, synchronicity. Things happen for reasons. Um, in it's very funny because when I saw Soul Doctor and reviewed it, the guy that owns part of the paper, David Bash, he knew Shlomo and he was a writer and he had written with Shlomo and he's like,
Really,
oh my
really.
God, Stan, I can't believe you know this. I'm like, yes, I do now. So
I must interview him. You see, Shlomo knew everyone well, and he had that, it's a story. This is the story of Shlomo and Nina Simone, or the story of the Jewish revival, is really, Shlomo's greatest talent. He really could meet you once and remember you 30 years later, but really lift you up like really believe in you and have such a great acceptance and such a great belief in the other person and want to, very empowering and uplifting person. And that's really what the story was about when he met Nina. And Nina was the same way. Nina Simone didn't meet someone. I've never met someone that said, I didn't really know Nina Simone. I only met her for 5 minutes. I've had people said I met her for 2 minutes and they'll go on and on about those 2 minutes for hours and hours and hours. So that's really what the story is. It's about really appreciating and valuing each other. So your editor, is just an example of people who had a real connection to
well,
them. To
you would
them.
really like David. His mother was one of Mengele's people in the Holocaust.
Oh my God.
And he became his mother's confidant. And strangely enough, he became well, not strangely, he became isolated, and meeting Shlomo was actually an opening point.
I would
So
love to interview. That's a very powerful story. That's such a powerful story.
now you'd like him. He speaks like 13 languages.
I speak Yiddish in 14 languages.
Yep, you're going to get along great.
I speak Yiddish in 15 languages. An unlimited amount of languages I can speak Yiddish in.
Yeah, surprisingly enough, David was born in Transylvania. So
You're kidding. Oh, really? I've got to meet him. Set up an appointment now.
Is there anything that I haven't asked you that you would like our audiences to know either about you or Soul Doctor or Shlomo?
Yeah.
Yeah, I have to say this one thing and I'm talking to a Times Square Chronicles. I'm talking to my neighborhood. I'm talking to the world of Broadway, and to me, I have spent 25, 30 years working in professional theater, working in Broadway, on Broadway, with Broadway, being part of the league, and it's so important to remember what Broadway is. Broadway is from downtown New York, from uptown, downtown. New York is the capital of world theater, and Soul Doctor comes from New York. It comes from the New York Theater Workshop. It comes from the folks being all the actors were New Yorkers, and this is what we're celebrating here is a real New York story. It's a New York story about New Yorkers, and it's a New York show, and that's why it's really special and a privilege to be able to talk to you right in the heart of where we were spawned and born, and that's where we're celebrating.
Daniel, I have to cut you off because sadly our time is up. We have been talking with Daniel Weiss, Soul Doctor director. So happy.